All right, TFcon. We're going to get started with our next panel, which is a Q&A panel with some G1 voice actors. Up on the stage, we have Neil Ross and Gregg Berger. Let's give a big TFcon welcome to these guys. Now, this is a Q&A panel, so the content that comes out of this are based on the questions you ask. I'm going to get us started with an intro question, but as soon as you have a question, come right up to the mic, and we're going to go for about 50 minutes or so. Neil and Gregg, we'd like to start off by asking you, how did you get started in your career, and at what point can you tell us what brought you to the Transformers franchise?
You want to go first while I try to think up a story?
I'm a blabbermouth. I can always go. Actually, there's two of us, so I guess one will rise and one will fall.
I got a feeling where I'm going.
Wow. It depends on how far back you want to go. I've always been smitten by and intrigued by and kind of driven by voices and the characters who make them. Back to when I was riding the bus with my mother, I would look at people on the bus and try to guess from the way they looked, how they sounded. As a naive kid, I would engage people on that same bus in conversation to see if I was right. It was kind of a driving, if not consuming, passion from the time I was little. I acted on that passion, and I acted. Not when I was a little kid. I was a little kid, and when I was a teenager, I was a teenager, and I am so thankful that I did all of that experiential stuff. Just acquiring experience. And it wasn't until actually college, when I went in as an English major, that a roommate, I mean, I'm making a short answer long, but a roommate said, geez, you go into characters when you tell a story in the dining hall, you always, for lack of a better word, animate the stories that you tell by sort of becoming the characters that you're talking about. He said, did you ever think about auditioning for anything in the theater department? And he dragged me to an audition that they were having trouble finding someone for one part in particular, and it was a drawing room, dark comedy, English farce. Anyway, I read for it, I got it. And opening night, the head of the theater department, who wasn't familiar with me, said, what are you doing in the English department? And I said, I don't know, maybe I'll teach English or do pre-law or something. He said, well, don't stop doing what you're doing. But he said, you're the kind of raw talent that we really like to feed and water, and I'm encouraging you to expand your horizons. Even longer answer. But I'm saying my direction kind of found me, and I was smart enough to say yes and include it. So what was fresh for me wasn't fresh for a lot of the, kid actors I got acquainted with further in my career who'd been doing it forever, and for some of them it was already tired. It was not tired for me. It's still not tired for me. So my whole thing was theater, and when I got to LA, it was theater and improv. And I did television, and I did stage, and I got seen on stage. Thank God he's finally there, by Gordon Hunt one night, who was directing all animation at Hanna-Barbera. Also on another night, I got seen by Wally Burr, who was in the audience. He called me in, and Neil can probably add to this part, but he said to me, you were very versatile on stage, and here's how I'm casting this gigantic show, Transformers, and this gigantic show, G.I. Joe. And the way he did it was he had a lot of scripts out on a table, and if I remember correctly, he said, pick 3 that you think are best for you. Well, nobody does that. Everybody tries to decide for you. Sometimes you end up reading for something that's totally wrong for you, and then boom, the opportunity is gone, and you didn't have any say in the matter. Well, I think that was like unbelievably smart on Wally's choice, and I think that's why he wound up with characters that have had this kind of appeal for this length of time. Anyway, that gets us up to the question, and I'll shut up now.
Well, my story is chronicled in my book, Vocal Recall, A Life in Radio and Voiceovers, which is available on Amazon. And there's also an audio version on Audible, which I read in my disturbingly masculine voice. But I'll give you the cliff notes. Very much like Gregg, I, at a very young age, became fascinated by voices and accents. Now, Gregg is gregarious, so he would buttonhole people on the bus. I sat in my room and listened to the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and they ran a lot of stuff from the BBC. And so I got into the tail end of the golden age of radio drama, radio comedy. I heard The Goon Show, which you may have never heard of. It's worth looking up. All the guys in Monty Python say there would be no Monty Python without The Goon Show, so it is worth researching. And I would just hole up in my room and do voices and accents, and my father would go, my son, he talks to himself. I don't know why. And then, as a teenager, I got seduced by rock and roll, which led me to the mad dream of becoming a radio disc jockey, which I did for 20 years. But I gradually became aware of this business called voiceovers, and I started wondering if there might be a place for me. And I eventually got to Los Angeles and started auditioning, got a wonderful agent, Donna Lee Davies, rest her soul. Yep. And one night she went to some kind of an event and met this fella named Wally Burr. And they hit it off, and he said, Donna, any of your people want to come in and read for me? Feel free, send them over. I'll be happy to audition them. And as Gregg pointed out, and he's right, it is not usually the case, there would be maybe 10 characters laid out on the table, and you would be invited to take your pick. Most of the time you go in and go, here's what we've got, and read this. And it's so wonderful to look at the picture and read the copy and go, oh, this guy I could do. And I originally got into G.I. Joe. I got the role of Shipwreck. And then at a certain point, well, thank you very much, I appreciate it. At a certain point, Donna said, you know, Wally's doing another show. It's called Trans something or other. Do you want to read for that? And I said, why would I do an idiotic thing like that? I mean, of course I want to read for it. And my experience was similar to Gregg's, so that a much more long-winded version of that story is available if you get the book. If you forget the title, stop by my table. I'll give you a postcard. That's end of plug. End of story. Where is the interlocutor? Should I interview Gregg? All right, let's start with questions from the audience.
Thank you. My question will be to you, Neil.
Yes. Okay.
I hate to sound like Rick from The Young Ones. In case you're familiar with that iconic show. Oh, what are you doing, Neil? To make a meal, Neil. Rest in peace, Rick Mail. Anyways, in 1986, how did you feel with Transformers the movie and An American Tail that same year?
I felt like maybe I'm in showbiz. The only other time it was that interesting was when I did a bunch of voices for a movie that Robert Redford directed called Quiz Show. And it came out more or less the same time as Back to the Future 2, where I was the voice of the Biff Tannen Museum. And I would walk along Hollywood Boulevard going, well, I got a couple of pictures coming out next week. You know, like I was actually somebody, you know. So, yeah, it was a very heady time. What can I tell you? You know,
That period, that period of years, there it is. That period of years, it was like all of us needed an air traffic controller, and it was not dissimilar to the golden age of radio. Howie Morris told me it was like you would have to check your schedule to see what studio you needed to be in next. We were all so booked that you actually needed a calendar in front of you, because the odds are, if you were running late in one studio, then you were late for starting in the next studio. It was a golden age of animation, and we were so busy that you had to really work to convince yourself that it wasn't always going to be like this. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And of course, it isn't always like that. But we were so busy that you didn't see your home from early in the morning till late at night most days, because you were running and squeezing auditions in between when you could. It was extraordinary. It was an astonishing time, and like Neil said, this little voice in your head said, I'm in the industry. I'm part of this machine, and I'm working as fast as I can and turning in the best work of my life. And I'm just extraordinarily busy. And when you started your question, I thought you were ordering us both to kneel. I started to.
Oh,
Well,
sorry.
I was once
sorry
working,
about that.
I was once working.
You Grimlock, no Neil, you king.
That's right.
I once did a-
Neil or me king.